from The Athletic, the outstanding Matt Fortuna. It's been a long time since we talked, sir. Welcome.
Hey, way too long. Appreciate you having me on, Steve. How you doing?
Yeah, doing really well. How about you, Matt?
Doing well. Busy as usual, but it's been good for business, so who am I to complain?
It has been good for everybody's business to talk about this. All right, so obviously, John Wilner's a great reporter, and this story is his baby. And I think all of us were, really? So what was your reaction? And then after a couple of days, did you change that reaction?
My initial reaction, Steve, was surprised, more so at the timing than anything else. I thought and still think it's kind of inevitable that every powerful football brand is going to eventually assimilate under the Big Ten or SEC umbrella. I didn't see it happening that quickly, though. Not that to make the alliance to be something bigger than it was, which was really nothing other than a show of posture. That part of it surprised me a little bit because it didn't even last a full year. Again, not that this is new Pac-12 Commissioner George Klavkov's fault per se, but it seemed like he had a really good handle and showed support and unity since he took over 364 days before that news broke last week on the last day of the fiscal year. So I was surprised by the timing, and like everyone else, I'm just kind of waiting for the next domino to fall and see what's next because much like with last year's news with Texas, Oklahoma, it rarely happens in a nutshell. It's usually one big thing that happens that leads to many other smaller things happening. And I think we're all kind of waiting on pins and needles to see what those other things may be.
And, of course, the biggest chip left in the game is Notre Dame. They go to the beat of their own drum, Matt, as you and I know. Is there a point, though, where now they have it might be dictated that they can't just go to the beat of their own drum anymore?
Yeah, Steve, I think the calculus has changed a little bit for Notre Dame. I mean, I think, for as long as they've fielded a football program, anytime something happens in the greater college football world, one of the immediate follow-up questions, right, is, so does this mean Notre Dame has to relinquish its football independence? And my answer the previous 100 times has always been no. They're at a good spot. I thought that to be particularly true last year during the SEC's movement because at that point in time, we were under the assumption that the new playoff field was already set. New playoff format was going to be 12 teams, and Notre Dame was going to be one of those teams in it. And their athletic director, Jack Swarbrick, was one of the architects of that 4-team proposal that eventually fell through. Now, there's a little bit more uncertainty, but even more than that, I just think our idea of a conference by dictionary definition has completely evolved over the last week. I mean, I think the fear in Notre Dame country was always, well, why would we join the Big Ten? They've already got a bunch of Midwest football powers. We would just kind of be another one of those, for lack of a better term. Well, ever since last week, the Big Ten's no longer a Midwest conference. I mean, I don't even know if I'd call it a conference per se. It's a group of schools, literally from coast to coast, that all share, for the most part, similar academic identities and missions and play a lot of good football and all have very valuable brands. And so, to me, if you're Notre Dame, if you were to join the Big Ten tomorrow, I don't think you're sacrificing any of your national reach. You're still playing games in California probably every year. You're still getting to the East Coast probably every year. You're getting a much tougher football schedule. And, by the way, now with this USC and UCLA move, I mean, that media rights package that's coming up, it's probably going to net every Big Ten school north of $100 million per year. And that's a number that at some point just becomes too big to gap on your own. I mean, to bridge on your own. I mean, Notre Dame, they were getting rich off their NBC deal when they first signed it 20, 30 years ago. Right now, they're making $15 to $20 million off it, and they're making maybe 10 off their Olympic sports from the ACC. So I just think you get out your calculators, you do the long-term math. I mean, as long as that current ACC deal runs, which is through 2036, and who knows what the world will look like then, we're talking about $1 billion potentially being left on the table long term if you're Notre Dame by not joining the Big Ten. So I think that's something that at least has their attention in a way that previous moves did not.
Right, and I mean, look, they stayed away from bowl games till 1970. Mm-hmm. They've stayed away from conferences except when the ACC gave them a lifeboat to play games in 2020. But their biggest rival is now going to be a Big Ten team.
Right.
And that's USC. So let me flip this for a moment. How enamored are Notre Dame fans, whether they're alums or the Subway alumni, about the 5 ACC games they play every year?
I think they were initially when this deal got put together about 10 years ago, because remember at that point in time, the Big East was collapsing. Notre Dame had to find a place for its Olympic sports. And, I think there's just as much similarity, if you will, between Notre Dame's mission with most of the ACC schools as there are with the Big Ten. Obviously, again, big Midwest football power, but the ACC also has the perfect kind of mix of public and public and private academic institutions. And Notre Dame has long been viewed kind of as an East Coast school that just happens to be located in the Midwest. So I thought it was a good deal at the time. I still think it's a good deal right now because Notre Dame still has the freedom to schedule pretty much whoever it wants. And look, I mean, ACC football just is not Big Ten football outside of Clemson and maybe one or two other teams every year. Like, Notre Dame has had their way with ACC competition to the point where you start gaming this thing out long term, and you look at expanded playoffs and you look at potential schedules. There's no question Notre Dame would have a much tougher football schedule playing a full Big Ten slate than they would playing 5 ACC football teams a year. You throw in the fact that the money would obviously be astronomically higher, and I think Notre Dame fans and alums are a lot more open to that idea of going 2 feet in with one conference than they ever were before. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of important people there who have their reservations about it. And again, this is something the school looks at as much as an institutional identity as they do a football one. And I don't think this is a decision that will be made by one person in the athletic department or even one person on the board. It's going to be a collaborative, deliberate decision that's probably going to take some time here. I do think the idea of joining a conference is completely different now than it was even a week ago.
Yeah, which is interesting. They're in a spot where, again, as I mentioned, they've been able to kind of do things the way they want to do it and have done well. But this, what's interesting for the Big Ten is this move is made while they were in TV negotiations. So now they can negotiate with having USC and UCLA in their back pocket with the deal. That's why it hasn't come out yet. Notre Dame's deal with NBC doesn't run out till 2025. Do you think everybody can be patient for them, and how patient can Notre Dame be because of that?
Yeah, I thought, again, after last week's news, again, in hindsight, it made some sense, right? Like, this is why the Big Ten has yet to announce its TV deal that we thought would have been done by now. They obviously were working on some other things behind the scenes and were increasing their media rights value, which, again, that deal still hasn't been signed and announced yet or fully negotiated out yet. So that makes you think, hey, they want to bring Notre Dame to the table right now and be as valuable as possible to their media partners. The sense I got to know is that, the Big Ten isn't exactly putting Notre Dame's feet to the fire right now, nor is Notre Dame itching to make a decision immediately. The playbook I've been told to turn to is essentially what Notre Dame did when they made that initial ACC move 10 years ago in 2012. I mean, the Big East was falling apart. Jack Swarbrick, their athletic director, had publicly, even floated the idea of finding a temporary home for its Olympic sports for a year before they can figure out a long-term situation. They weren't the first to move, and they weren't the last to move. And in some ways, I think that could be the case here as well. Now the interesting part with the NBC deal, but by all accounts, NBC wants a piece of this Big Ten deal. And I'd be curious if there's any language in that contract in Notre Dame to see if that can be reopened and renegotiated should NBC not be, or Notre Dame not be the exclusive college football program playing every week on NBC. I think there's some dynamics there that have to shake out as well.
Back in the day, I think all of us knew that between Father Hesburgh and Father Joyce, we knew who was running the show at Notre Dame. Jack Swarbrick, no question, has really done a great job there. What have you ever had any read, Matt, on on Father Jenkins, John Jenkins, as to what kind of how he feels about athletics and how he feels about the world we're in right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, Steve. He's a guy for as prominent of a post as he holds and for as long as he's held that post, really doesn't appear in the public eye a whole lot or offer a whole lot to tip his hand either way. I think he has a very good working relationship with Jack Swarbrick. He trusts Jack Swarbrick to do what's in the best interest of that university. I believe they were students together at Notre Dame at the same time in the 70s. Now, I don't know if they were dorm mates or buddies or anything like that. But that's another interesting wrinkle that I think at least lets the public know that they're probably coming at this from the same place. Now, again, I do think this is bigger than an athletic department or team decision. When they had to make a football coaching hire in December, Jack Swarbrick had free reign to do the search as he sees fit. He obviously promoted Marcus Freeman from within about a 3 or 4 day span after Brian Kelly left. And Father Jenkins was actually in Rome at the time. And I believe he zoomed in for 1 or 2 interviews, but they this was Jack Swarbrick's decision. It's not going to be done, I think, in that manner, if and when Notre Dame makes a move on independence or joining a conference. I mean, I remember they had to delay Marcus Freeman's public introduction and press conference. He got announced on a Friday. They introduced him on a Monday so that Father John could get back. I think it'll be done via more than just Zoom channels this time around, as far as whatever decision Notre Dame ends up making. And again, I think the board will be heavily involved in this, much like they were back in 1999 when they decided not to go to the Big Ten, when that was last on the table. But I'll be curious to see the timeline of all this.
Yeah, Father Malloy's name never came up in 99 when he was the president of Notre Dame. It was the faculty senate voted, yes, we want to do this because, obviously with the academic share, no question. But then the board of trustees, and I think the meeting was in Dublin.
It was London.
It was in London. Okay. They weren't even on this continent at the time. Everybody picks different spots to do things, Matt. So let's go to London.
Well, it's funny. I found the old letter that they sent out to the student body last week. We found a colleague of mine and myself, and we were reading it, and it was explaining in vivid detail to the Notre Dame constituency why they elected not to do this. And it was just really funny reading it, with the benefit of hindsight and with, 23 years removed. And we couldn't believe the media interest. There were newspapers staked out at our hotel ballrooms. And the idea of a newspaper having the money to send anyone overseas right now is pretty novel. But seeing the way the media ecosystem has changed a little bit in 2 decades since is pretty laughable as well.
Are there any other chips on the table among the others across the country, Matt? Because this is all about you don't expand unless they can enhance the financial number,
right?
I mean, because now it becomes more mouths to feed and everybody gets less. Is there anybody out there that has the ability outside of Notre Dame that can enhance a financial number?
Yeah, Steve, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. And that's another interesting kind of subplot of all this, right? I think Notre Dame is the one out there right now that would absolutely make all 16 teams in the Big Ten or SEC richer if they were to join tomorrow. I don't know if there's any individual schools or any para schools that can say the same. Now, is this a game of chicken? Is the SEC looking at, say, North Carolina, which is probably a swing vote, if you will? I could see them in either one of those conferences long term. Mm-hmm. And they happen to have a major national brand that sits in the 10th largest state in the country and the biggest state in the country that is not currently a part of the SEC or Big Ten territories. Right. Does the SEC make a move on them or try to make a move on them as a proactive measure to keep the Big Ten from getting them first? Because, again, if all roads lead to a Big Two, those Big Two are going to go at each other's throats, and they're going to want the best product to punch back against the other, the ESPN conference versus the Fox conference, for lack of a better term. So I do wonder how much of that is at play here. How much of it is a game of chicken and just accumulating as many assets as possible versus, hey, we're all doing pretty well financially here. Let's not make any other moves that are going to cut our pieces of the pie any further.
All right, so then that brings this element up, since you brought up North Carolina, which is an AAU school. Notre Dame, by the way, is not, but there are exceptions to every rule. But they're an AAU school. We know what they bring to the table. You talked about all the dynamics, the brand, as well as the territory. How difficult, based on the research that's been done, is it to break the ACC grant of rights?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason no one's tried to get, right? Steve, I mean, my colleague Andy Staples had a really thorough story last Friday. I'd encourage everyone to read it, where he prints the grant of rights and he talks to a lawyer who studied it into the detail and tried to come up with ways legally they would go about trying to break it. And look, rest assured, leadership at some of those top ACC schools have explored and are continuing to explore every potential legal loophole they can find in the event they do get an invite from the Big Ten or SEC and they want to try to break that grant of rights. It's real money. I mean, I'm talking 9 figures minimum, as far as what you'd be sacrificing. Now, it's only 3 pages long. It's pretty intentionally light on specific details, and it's essentially an ambiguous number that the ACC would determine your media rights value is at. And again, that's over the next 14 years, so it's going to be significant. Now, I think there are some schools in the ACC that would argue and that are hoping Notre Dame makes a move to another conference, and they can essentially argue to the ACC, hey, our value, what we signed up for, has been significantly diminished by the absence of our biggest moneymaker not playing 5 football games a year against us. And that's why, again, for a number of reasons, but that one in particular, the ACC, Notre Dame's next move has got everyone watching with bated breath.
Matt, Notre Dame, of course, the football part does not have any role in the grant of rights, but the other does. How reduced is the Notre Dame number compared to everybody else?
I don't have a solid answer for that, but knowing the way these media rights deals work, I mean, I would guess that's, if we're talking, say, $100 million for a full member, I'd say it's probably 10 to 20 million for non-football. I mean, football is 80 and 90% of the revenue here. And again, it's not a small chunk of change, but it's not prohibitive either when you're talking about long-term decision-making.
So let's have fun and guess. What would your guess be? 5 years from now, Notre Dame is where?
Oof, 5. Jeez. What's the score? Tell me what the playoff system is 5 years from now.
I don't know what the playoff system is.
5 years from now, I say they're in whatever the Big Ten's calling themselves. But 5 years is a long time from now.
Oh, it'll stay the Big Ten. That's a corporate name. Matt, you don't teach your children through sports, all right? The Big Ten has 16, right? Missouri's in the SEC East. You don't teach your kids through sports.
The Pac-12 can go back to the Pac-10 now.
Yes, they can. They could swing back. The ones I feel sorriest for, I feel bad for Oregon State, Washington State. I feel, and really Cal and Stanford to a point, because I feel like they're in no man's land.
I would agree with you. I think Stanford has an outside shot through their academics and their relationship with Notre Dame, where if the Big Ten want to go even, I think they have a chance.
Yes.
But I'm with you. The Oregon States and Washington States of the world are in pretty dire straits right now.
Stanford's chip is Notre Dame.
Yes, absolutely.
I absolutely agree with you, man. That's really, as always, a pleasure. Let's talk more, my friend. Appreciate you.
Absolutely, Steve.